The first insult came while I was watering my sunflowers. "You really think that jungle's helping our property values?" I turned slowly, still holding the watering can, and there she was, Pam, president of the HOA, ruler of all things bland and beige, standing at the edge of her pristine sidewalk like she was about to call in air support. She wore khakis that hadn't seen dirt in years, and a pastel blouse, so stiff it looked ironed onto her body. Her arms were crossed tight, her lips pursed like she just sucked on a lemon, and behind her, a perfectly trimmed lawn, 2 symmetrical shrubs, and flower beds so uniform they looked machine-printed. Not a petal out of place. She looked at my yard like it was a crime scene. To be fair, it didn't look like everyone else's. My garden was alive, full of tall, waving coneflowers, wild milkweed, sunflowers stretching up toward the sky, and bees bouncing between blossoms like tiny, happy workers. It wasn't messy. It was just untamed. Natural. Real. I smiled. It's a pollinator garden. Native plants. Good for bees. She scoffed. It's an eyesore. HOA rules clearly state all yards must be tidy and uniform. You've got weeds taller than a 3rd grader. They're coneflowers, I replied calmly. They're supposed to be tall. That's how the butterflies find them. Pam didn't respond. She already had her phone out, aiming it at my garden like it was evidence in a criminal trial. She snapped a series of rapid-fire photos, sunflowers, the painted rocks my niece left, the solar-powered bee ornament, and then marched off without another word. You'd think I'd just installed a rusted car frame on my front lawn. I stood there, still holding the watering can, staring at the spot where she stood. My stomach dropped. I knew what was coming. Pam didn't take pictures for fun. If she took a photo, she was filing a complaint. And if Pam filed a complaint, it meant trouble. Sure enough, 2 days later, I found it taped to my front door in red ink. Yard in violation of HOA guidelines. Remove unapproved garden or face fines. There it was. Official. Cold. Impersonal. Just like Pam. My heart sank. This wasn't just about plants. That garden was therapy. After I lost my mom to cancer, I couldn't bring myself to sit still. So I started planting. A few seeds here. A pot of lavender there. Before I knew it, the entire front yard had become a quilt of color. It was the only thing that got me out of bed that first summer. The only thing that made sense in a world that didn't anymore. Pam didn't care. To her, it was weeds and wildness. A personal attack on her sense of order. I tried to stay calm. I emailed the HOA, attached photos, even linked to articles about how native gardens supported declining pollinator populations. I offered to trim the edges, mulch more thoroughly, add signs explaining the plants. 2 days later, Pam replied with a single sentence. The board has reviewed the situation. The garden must be removed by Friday. No signature. No greeting. Just a digital guillotine. I stared at the screen for a long time. And then, I didn't get angry. I got creative. I opened another tab and searched for Urban Pollinator Garden Competitions. Within minutes, I found it. The National Urban Gardening Challenge. An annual contest that recognized native, sustainable gardens in city and suburban spaces. Exactly like mine. I grabbed my phone and snapped photos from every angle. Sunlight hitting the golden sunflowers, bees hovering over milkweed, the monarch caterpillar I spotted the day before munching away on a leaf. I wrote up a quick description. This garden was built from grief, grown with love, and designed for pollinators. I clicked submit. It wasn't about winning. It was about telling the story Pam refused to see. That weekend, while Pam was measuring someone's mailbox for being 2 inches too tall, I was out adding finishing touches. I painted small wooden signs identifying each plant. Bee balm, loved by hummingbirds. Milkweed, monarch nursery. I trimmed the path with reclaimed bricks. Planted more lavender. Meanwhile, more notices arrived from the HOA. I let them pile up unopened on the kitchen table, because a few days later, an email arrived that made me forget every single one. Congratulations! You've been selected as a finalist in the National Urban Gardening Challenge. I gasped. Out of hundreds of entries, mine had been chosen. The next week, Two judges showed up in my driveway wearing straw hats and cargo pants. They walked through my garden slowly, nodding, taking notes. They asked thoughtful questions. One of them even knelt down to photograph a bee covered in pollen. Across the street, I saw Pam peeking through her blinds. The judges stayed for nearly an hour. Before they left, one of them said, "You didn't just grow flowers here. You created a sanctuary." That evening, something unexpected happened. My next-door neighbor, Mr. Callahan, who'd barely waved in 3 years, walked over with his grandson. He looked at my garden, then back at me, and asked, "Would you help us start something like this in our yard?" I said yes. Word spread. 2 more neighbors reached out. One wanted to add wildflowers. Another asked about bee baths. People started seeing the garden instead of just walking past it. The day of the contest announcement arrived faster than I expected. It streamed live online. I sat on my couch, clutching my coffee like a lifeline, watching entry after entry flash across the screen. Rooftop gardens in New York, vertical walls in Chicago, a sunflower maze in Portland. Then came the words I'll never forget. And the winner for Best Pollinator Garden, Lisa H., for transforming a suburban yard into a native plant haven that blends grief, resilience, and beauty. I screamed so loud I scared the cat. The next morning, a local reporter showed up to take photos. The headline read, "Local Woman's Eyesore Garden Wins National Award." That's when the real twist came. Turns out, the contest was sponsored in part by our state's environmental agency. When they saw that my HOA was fining me for planting native species, they sent an official notice reminding the HOA that state law protected such gardens for ecological benefit. The HOA's threats? Gone. The fines? Canceled. The garden? Officially protected. Pam. She didn't say a word. But a week later, I saw her in her yard with a packet of daisy seeds. Maybe, just maybe she'd learned something. Now, my garden is more than just mine. It's a stop on school field trips, a gathering place for butterflies, a living tribute to the mother I lost, and the peace I found in growing something beautiful. And every time someone walks by and says, "Wow, your yard is amazing," I smile and think, this eyesore. It won, and it's still blooming. 2 days later, I got a notice taped to my door. Not mailed, not handed over politely, just slapped onto the wood with red tape, like I'd committed a crime. Yard in violation of HOA guidelines. Remove unapproved garden or face fines. I stared at it for a moment. My stomach twisted. I didn't even tear it down right away. I just stood there, reading the words again and again, hoping I had misunderstood. But I hadn't. They really wanted me to destroy it. My garden. The space I'd built with my own hands. The space that kept me going. Because to them, it wasn't a sanctuary. It was a violation. I sat on the porch steps for a long time after that, watering can still in hand. Bees buzzed by, unaware of the drama, floating from bloom to bloom like nothing was wrong. I wished I could be that free. But I wasn't. Not anymore. See, that garden wasn't just plants. It wasn't just a hobby or a decoration. It was therapy. After my mom passed away, I fell into a hole I couldn't describe. The days blurred. Nights felt endless. People sent flowers, but the moment they wilted, I fell apart again. And one day, I just went outside. No plan. No reason. I dug a hole. Planted something, anything. I don't even remember what it was. But it grew. Slowly. It gave me something to check on. Something to nurture. Watering became breathing. Trimming became praying. I poured my grief into that soil. And somehow, out of all that sadness, color bloomed. It wasn't a picture-perfect garden like Pam's. But it was real. Full of life. Birds came. Bees danced. Butterflies floated through like they belonged there. I created a tiny ecosystem, right in the middle of suburbia. And now the HOA wanted it gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the scene in my head, Pam, crossing her arms, snapping photos, acting like I'd planted danger instead of daisies. She didn't understand, and worse, she didn't care. The next morning, I took action. I emailed the HOA. I wrote calmly, respectfully, and clearly. I attached links to city ordinances, showing that native gardens weren't against the law. I included studies from environmental groups. I even offered to trim the taller plants, mulch the borders, and add signage for education. 2 days later, I got a reply. One sentence. No greeting. No explanation. The board has decided. Remove it by Friday. That was it. No heart. No humanity. Just a decision handed down like a gavel strike. I reread it at least 10 times. Then I closed my laptop slowly and stared out the window at the garden swaying gently in the breeze. The purple bee balm, the black-eyed Susans, the milkweed, home to a family of monarch caterpillars. They were thriving, alive, and I realized something. I wasn't going to destroy it. In fact, I was going to show them what it truly was. I opened a new browser tab and searched native gardening contests, pollinator-friendly front yards, National Urban Gardening Challenge. Bingo! There it was, a nationwide contest for sustainable, eco-conscious gardens. Winners had been featured in magazines, interviewed on the news, even used to push for local policy change. I clicked Apply Now. The form wasn't short. They wanted photos, descriptions, plant lists, the story behind the garden. And I gave it all to them. Every angle, every bloom. I took a photo of a bee hovering over the echinacea, a butterfly landing on a blade of grass, my niece's painted rock tucked beneath a sunflower. But the part one spent the most time on? The essay. They asked, "Why did you create this garden?" And I told them the truth. I wrote about my mom, about grief, about the loneliness that turned into soil under my fingernails. I wrote about the joy I felt when the first hummingbird visited, about the neighbor's kid who came over just to count butterflies, about how digging saved me when nothing else could. I wrote for hours. When I finally clicked submit, I sat back in my chair, heart racing, not because I thought I'd win, but because I'd told my story, fully, honestly. Then I stood up, grabbed my gloves, and went back outside. I wasn't going to tear it down. I was going to make it even better. Over the next few days, I poured everything into that garden. I added mulch to tidy the borders, planted ground cover to keep the weeds down, made small, tasteful wooden signs to label the native species. Coneflower feeds bees. Milkweed, monarch habitat. Bee balm, hummingbird favorite. I placed a small bench near the edge of the sidewalk so passers-by could sit and admire the blooms. And the response? Instant. A jogger stopped to compliment the colors. A woman walking her dog said her kid had named one of the sunflowers. A car even slowed down so someone could take a picture. But Pam, she wasn't moved. She walked by one afternoon, gave the bench a disgusted look, and muttered, "Still a mess." I didn't say a word. I just smiled and kept trimming the lavender. The HOA notices didn't stop. I received 2 more in the following weeks, each one escalating in tone. Threats of legal action, fines, warnings. I kept them all in a folder, unopened, because deep down, I knew something had shifted. This garden wasn't just mine anymore. It had become something else. A quiet rebellion, a symbol, an example. And then, almost a month after I'd applied, an email arrived. Subject line, National Urban Gardening Challenge, finalist notification. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. Congratulations. My garden had been selected as a finalist. One of the top entries in the country. The judges would be visiting soon to see it in person. I screamed so loud, I scared the dog. I printed the email, framed it, and placed it right next to the HOA violation notice still hanging in the kitchen. A few days later, the judges arrived, 2 of them, dressed in comfortable clothes, sun hats, and big smiles. They walked slowly through the garden, asking questions, taking photos, nodding at the pollinator signs. One of them knelt to photograph a caterpillar munching on milkweed. And across the street, Pam stood at her window, watching every moment. The judges stayed for nearly an hour. Before they left, one turned to me and said, "You didn't just plant flowers. You built something that breathes." I stood there after they left, overwhelmed. The very thing that Pam called an eyesore had become a contender for national recognition. But it wasn't about proving her wrong anymore. It was about honoring the space that had helped me heal. I looked out over the garden, The bees, the blooms, the breeze. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. No matter what the contest said, no matter how many notices Pam sent, I knew one thing for sure. I did the right thing. And this time, I wasn't digging alone. I was planting something bigger, something lasting, something no HOA president could ever uproot. I didn't know if I'd win. Honestly, I didn't even know if I'd get picked. There were gardens out there with trained landscapers, sponsored compost setups, and Pinterest-worthy designs. Mine was just mine. Hand-built, hard-grown, uneven in places, sure, but alive, honest, vibrant. Still, I uploaded the best photos I could. The sunflower stretching to the sky, the milkweed bouncing under butterfly wings, the soft hum of bees in the lavender. I included close-ups of a monarch caterpillar climbing a leaf, a hummingbird mid-hover near the bee balm, and even a snapshot of my niece laughing on the little garden bench she helped me paint. I wrote the story behind it all with shaking hands. How the garden helped me grieve. How digging helped me breathe. How the soil felt like therapy. How something green could bloom out of something so painful. I told them how the HOA called it an eyesore. How the president, Pam, kept sending notices. How I was being asked to destroy the only thing that gave me peace. Then I clicked submit. That night, I stood on the porch and looked at the flowers swaying under the moonlight. The garden didn't know about contests or rules or HOA guidelines. It just grew, despite everything. And I thought, maybe that's the point. But the next morning, I didn't relax. I got to work. If this garden was going to be seen by people outside the neighborhood, by actual judges, I wanted it to reflect what it truly was. Not a mess, not wild chaos, but a living place with purpose. I made small wooden signs, hand-painted in soft colors, identifying each plant. Milkweed, monarch butterflies love this. Black-eyed Susan, great for pollinators. Echinacea, healing roots, healing minds. Bee balm, hummingbird favorite. I tucked them gently next to each flower bed. I trimmed the edges, laid a narrow stone path to guide visitors, and added a handmade bird bath, just a simple ceramic bowl resting on stacked bricks. Birds found it within the hour. I laughed watching them flutter, splash, and shake out feathers with all the joy in the world. Meanwhile, Pam wasn't done. I found 2 more HOA notices in my mailbox. One claimed my signs were unauthorized, decorative clutter. The second included an official fine. The amount wasn't huge, but the message was clear. They were escalating. But I didn't flinch. I didn't pay, because something bigger was blooming, and it wasn't just the flowers. 3 weeks passed. The garden reached its peak, bursting with color and motion. It had become a tiny paradise, not just for me, but for my neighbors too. I caught kids stopping to watch bees, elderly couples walking slowly along the sidewalk to admire the colors, even Pam's husband snapping a picture when she wasn't looking. And then, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed. Subject, congratulations. I froze. Opened it. You've been selected as a finalist in the National Urban Gardening Challenge. Judges will be visiting your garden in person for the final evaluation round. Please reply to confirm your availability. I almost dropped my phone. Finalist. Out of hundreds, maybe thousands of entries. My garden. My eyesore. Now one of the top gardens in the entire country. I screamed. My dog barked. I called my sister and cried on the phone. She cried too. Then laughed. Then told me to go buy a new pair of gloves because I was going to be famous. That night, I danced around the garden like a child. The lavender swayed. The solar lights glowed. And I swear, even the bees buzzed a little happier. The next morning, I got serious. I started preparing the space for the visit. I didn't want to change the spirit of the garden, but I did want the judges to feel what I felt when I stood out there: peace, purpose, presence. I refreshed mulch, gently swept the stepping stones, pruned only what needed trimming, and fluffed the soil around the base of every flower. I even hung up a wind chime my mom had left behind. It had a soft, delicate sound, like distant laughter. Then I printed out one of the violation letters from the HOA, and I framed it, not to be petty, but as a reminder of what this garden had endured and survived. 2 days before the visit, Pam walked by while I was painting one last sign. She stopped on the sidewalk and said, "So, you think you're going to win something for that mess?" I didn't even look up. I just said, "We'll see." She scoffed and walked off, but I noticed something strange. She didn't have her clipboard. The morning of the visit, I was up early. The garden glowed with dew. The air was cool and clean. I brewed coffee, fed the dog, and paced the porch until a small silver car pulled up. 2 people stepped out, 1 man, 1 woman. Casual clothes. Warm smiles. Clipboards, yes, but not Pam's kind. Their clipboards held excitement, curiosity, respect. We walked slowly through the garden. They asked about each plant, about when it was planted, why I chose it, what I'd learned. I told them about the bees, the monarchs, the birds that came back after years of silence. I told them about my mom. I didn't cry, not until the woman crouched beside a blooming sunflower and said, "Your garden has a heartbeat." They stayed for almost an hour. They took notes, photos, videos. They even sipped lemonade on the bench beneath the lavender and said, "This doesn't feel like a competition. It feels like a gift." As they left, the man turned to me and said, "Thank you for letting us into your space. We can see how much love lives here." After they drove off, I sat down on the steps and just breathed. I didn't know if I'd win, but I knew, without a doubt, that I'd done the right thing. Later that week, I saw something I didn't expect. Pam. She was in her yard, not measuring anything, not holding her clipboard, just digging. She had a pair of gardening gloves on and a plastic tray of seedlings next to her. She glanced up, caught me watching, and for the first time ever, she smiled. Not a big one, not an apology, but not a scowl, just a small, human smile. And I smiled back. 2 judges came out a week later, both dressed almost exactly how you'd expect. Tan khakis, sun-safe shirts, wide-brimmed hats, and clipboards in hand. They looked like botanists on a mission, and I could hardly believe they were standing in my front yard. They didn't knock first. They wandered through the stone path I had carefully laid down, marveling at the explosion of wildflowers. I stayed back at first, letting them soak it all in. I watched as one of them knelt down to photograph a monarch caterpillar inching its way up a milkweed stem, while the other murmured something about excellent native integration. And across the street, there she was, Pam. She had pulled out a pair of binoculars, real ones, the kind you take bird watching. Except she wasn't bird watching, she was people watching, specifically garden judge watching. I waved at her. She didn't wave back, just turned sharply and stormed back into her house halfway through their visit, slamming the door so hard it made one of the judges glance up with a smirk. But I couldn't focus on her anymore, because then they asked to interview me, on camera. I was nervous, but something in me shifted when the camera light blinked on. It wasn't about ego or winning anymore, it was about voice. I told them how gardening helped me process my mom's death, how it gave me something to look forward to when everything else felt heavy, how this patch of earth became my refuge. I spoke about pollinators, about declining bee populations, about how neighborhoods could become ecosystems again if we just tried. I told them about the kids who came to watch butterflies, about the little girl who counted every single flower and said it was better than a zoo. One of the judges wiped at his eyes when I finished. I didn't cry, not until they packed up and left, and I stood in the quiet garden by myself. My front yard had become something else entirely, a quiet form of protest, a floral rebellion, and it was catching on. It started small. A neighbor I'd never spoken to knocked on my door one evening. He asked what kind of mulch I used. Then he asked if I could help him start something similar in his own yard, just a small patch of color for his kids to enjoy. I said yes. Then a family from 3 houses down brought their daughter to see the butterflies. She was wearing wings and called it the flower jungle. She asked if the bees were nice. I said, "They are if you are." People started waving more. Some came to sit on the bench I'd placed beneath the shade of my taller sunflowers. One woman brought her elderly mother by just to look. A man walking his dog started dropping off extra compost from his kitchen every week. It was like someone turned the volume up on the neighborhood. All because of plants. All because of color. All because I didn't back down. And then came the day of the announcement. I barely slept the night before. I kept refreshing my email. I checked the Gardening Challenge website a dozen times. I even brewed coffee at 3 a.m. and sat on the porch in the dark, staring at my garden, now lit by solar lights and full of sleeping flowers. It was funny. Win or lose, I wasn't the same person who had submitted that application weeks ago. I was braver, stronger, happier. Still, I wanted to win. Not to beat Pam, but to prove that what I created mattered. At 9:42 a.m., the email came. Subject: Congratulations, winner of the 2024 National Urban Gardening Challenge. I froze. My heart thumped so loud I could barely hear the birds outside. I opened the email with trembling fingers. There it was. My name, my address, my garden. First place. They called it a vibrant sanctuary of native life, purpose-driven planting, and personal resilience. I screamed. The dog barked. I ran out onto the porch barefoot, waving the phone over my head. Then something unbelievable happened. Within the hour, 2 local news vans pulled up. The gardening contest had issued a press release. They wanted to film a follow-up. Neighbors came out to watch. A small crowd formed. I did another on-camera interview, this time with makeup on and much less nervous. I smiled so much my cheeks hurt. They asked me what I'd do next. I said, I'm going to keep growing. Pam didn't come out that day, but I saw her peeking through the blinds. For once, I didn't feel angry or smug, just proud. A week later, a formal plaque arrived. It read, National Urban Gardening Challenge winner, for community, ecology, and spirit. I mounted it near the stone bench, right above the sign the little girl made that said, Butterflies Welcome. Pam eventually stopped trying. No more notices. No more fines. Maybe the national attention had something to do with it. Or maybe even she realized she'd lost the battle. One day, I found her husband walking their dog, and he said, It really is beautiful. She won't say it, but she knows. That meant more than I expected. The HOA held a meeting soon after. Not just about me, but about the future. New guidelines were drafted. A clause was added for pollinator-friendly native gardens, allowing them with clear rules and mutual respect. A few people thanked me for starting it, and I realized something big. This wasn't just a garden anymore. It was change, a ripple, a seed of possibility for everyone on the block. Months passed. The garden kept blooming. Every season brought something new, a different set of colors, a fresh rhythm of life. Neighbors stopped by regularly. Someone even started a Facebook group called Our Flower Street. And Pam, she didn't move away, but she changed, at least a little. One morning, I caught her out front planting marigolds. Small pots, nothing fancy, but they were real, and they were hers. She glanced up, met my eyes. Starting small, she said. I nodded. That's how all good things grow. She smiled. A real one this time. That afternoon, I added one last hand-painted sign to the garden. Nothing grows without a little resistance. And as the wind danced through the petals and the sun warmed the stone path, I sat on my bench, coffee in hand, and thought, sometimes beauty is the best revenge. And sometimes it's just the beginning. Let me know if you'd like a thumbnail image prompt for this segment, or want to continue expanding the final chapter of the story. The contest live-streamed the results online. I sat on the couch, palms sweaty, coffee untouched, my heart pounding loud enough to drown out the announcer. Garden entries from across the country flashed across the screen. Urban rooftops exploding with color, tiny balconies stuffed with herbs, community plots overflowing with tomatoes and wildflowers. Each story came with a little clip, people talking about healing, growth, community, resistance. I saw beauty, passion, purpose, and then came the final category, Best Pollinator Garden, National Winner. I sat forward. My chest tightened. Lisa H. For transforming a front yard into a haven for bees, butterflies, and healing. I screamed. No exaggeration, screamed. My dog jumped, nearly knocked over the table. My phone lit up like fireworks. Notifications, Texts, calls, emojis. You did it. We're so proud. I just saw your name on the live stream. Even a local reporter I'd never met called and asked if they could come film a segment for the evening news. I wasn't prepared for how emotional it all felt. My garden, the same space that once got me fined, was now being celebrated across the country. But the best part wasn't the win. It was what came next. The very next morning, a camera crew showed up. Real lights, real mics, real people with earpieces and clipboards. They asked me to walk through the garden and talk about each flower, each pollinator, each handmade sign. They filmed me next to my wooden bench. They zoomed in on bees hovering mid-flight. One of the crew even asked if they could bring their daughter by later because she was obsessed with butterflies. It didn't feel real. And of course, she showed up. Pam, still in her signature tennis visor, still carrying her sacred clipboard like it held the Constitution. She didn't knock, just stood near the edge of the sidewalk, pretending to read something as the cameras rolled. When the crew wrapped up, I turned to go inside, and that's when Pam made her move. She walked right up, stopped in front of the flowers, and said, "I hope you realize this doesn't change the rules." I looked at her. I smiled. Actually, it might. She tilted her head, clearly not expecting that, because what Pam didn't know was that the contest had caught the attention of our state's Environmental Council. One of the board members saw the live stream, read my story, and decided to do something about it. They contacted the city, and the city contacted the HOA. They delivered a simple, direct message. "You're discouraging environmentally beneficial landscaping practices. That's not going to fly." Turns out, state law had changed 2 years ago to protect native gardens. It just wasn't being enforced at the HOA level. Until now. My yard was now protected. The fine Pam had tried to stick me with? Gone. The violations? Erased from my record. The HOA, required to update the landscaping guidelines to allow pollinator-friendly gardens. Effective immediately. Pam didn't say much after that. Her face went stiff. She stared at the butterfly perched on my echinacea, then turned and walked away. No dramatic exit. No clipboard slamming. Just quiet retreat. That should have been the end of it. But life had one more twist to offer. The following week, I was out watering the garden when I noticed someone across the street crouched over a flower bed. It was Pam. No clipboard. No yelling. Just a small kneeling mat and a packet of wildflower seeds. She was planting daisies. She didn't see me at first, but when she did, she froze. We locked eyes across the street. Then she did something I never expected. She nodded. Not an apology. Not a surrender. Just respect. I gave her a quiet wave and went back to watering my lavender. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the sun set behind the blooms. Kids walked by, pointing at the butterflies. A neighbor waved. Someone dropped off compost. My garden was no longer a secret, no longer a shame. It was a sanctuary. It was proof that quiet resistance works, that planting something beautiful can be an act of power. A few weeks later, the HOA hosted a community Green Day event, encouraging others to plant native species and create wildlife-friendly yards. Guess who was listed as the guest speaker? Me. I stood in front of 30 people in the community clubhouse and told my story. I brought photos, plant samples, and pollinator handouts. I even handed out free seed packets. Yes, the same kind Pam had used. I ended my talk by saying this. Nature doesn't ask for permission. It grows. It blooms. It survives. And sometimes, so should we. People clapped. Some cried. Later, someone told me, "You didn't just grow a garden. You grew a movement." Now, every time I step outside, I see color. Not just in my own yard, but in others. A neighbor down the block started a raised butterfly bed. Another added bee boxes. Even Pam's yard. Still small. Still tidy. But the daisies returned. And this time, she didn't rip them out. And that, to me, is the real win. Because sometimes the loudest victory isn't the award or the plaque. It's the quiet bloom of change, taking root in the most unexpected places. And just like that, what started as grief became growth.